Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Giesemann Rabke, and my husband, Carl Rabke. Embodiment Matters is an ongoing, rich conversation about what it really means to be embodied and why and how embodiment matters so much in our daily lives and in our modern world. You can find out more about our wonderful guests, about our work. You can sign up for our newsletter and find out how to become a supporting member of our podcast online at embodimentmatters.com.
In this episode, we speak with Daniel Foor. And Daniel is a psychotherapist, he's a writer and teacher and practitioner of Practical Animism who specializes in ancestral and family healing and in helping folks learn to relate well with the rest of life. He wrote the book Ancestral Medicine, Rituals for Personal and Family Healing, and also founded the organization Ancestral Medicine. In our conversation, we really hit on a wide variety of topics. We look at the connection between embodiment and animism and just how deeply embedded we are in relationship with the seen and unseen world, often in ways that we don't recognize. I give some kind of good initial steps of how to create a more living relationship with the other than human world, and including ancestors. And we look at the value of family and ancestral healing. Anyway, we hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did. Daniel is also offering a Practical Animism online course, which you can still register for until mid-June 2019. If you would like to find more about his work, Daniel's website is ancestralmedicine.org.
Welcome, Daniel Foor, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
We usually like to start these conversations just with this question about embodiment and what embodiment means to you and why it matters.
Yeah, so it's a big question, but in general, it's been my experience as a cisgendered white American dude that the culture I was raised in didn't encourage being really rooted in my body and emotions and sensory reality. So like a lot of folks, I've had to do work to reclaim my emotional wellness and sense of connection to my heart and gut and body wisdom in that way. But also I would add that this body is not mine exactly. That for one, my own cells are far outnumbered by smaller bacteria and microorganisms who are very much genetically other than Daniel. And in addition to that, I'm completely dependent on the sacrifice of other animals and plants and elemental powers who are metabolized through this body and this system to just live and have this conversation. And so embodiment can be constructed as very individualistic. And what is exciting for me about the topic is when reorienting to sensory experience actually bottoms out into this interconnected reality that, when we ingest the bodies of others, we're also them a bit. And when others experience us, we're also them a bit. And so interconnectedness and embodiment feel important to hold in conversation with one another.
How did you say it? When sensory experience bottoms out into interconnectedness?
Yeah, there's an element here that's about love as well, that we're relational beings. And it's not just relationship with other living humans, that where the relationships happen, where the intimacy happens, even though a lot of folks in modern Western kinds of cultures aren't raised with the framework for those other kinds of relationships. And so when we reconnect or reorient our awareness, our consciousness to the physical, toward the, when we think the body, partly we mean the physical, then we see that even the most dense physical aspects of reality are moving, changing, and that there's not a separate self. There's not a self that occurs separate from relationships. And that suggests accountability and the importance of trying to show up respectfully and mindfully with others. And it means that the negotiations around boundaries and consent have layers and layers and layers of nuance to them when we recognize how profoundly interdependent we are. So, there's a lot of rich terrain when it comes to embodiment.
Yeah, it's interesting. In many of the kind of embodiment movement fields we run in, it's held as primarily a human experience. And I'm wondering, Daniel, if you can talk a little bit about the connection of embodiment and animism, which I know you teach a lot about that. And for listeners who aren't familiar with some basic principles of animism, if you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure. The tendency to see relationship and to construct intimacy and people as just living humans is a function of cultural damage and what I would attribute to colonialism or colonialist ways of thinking. In contrast to more relational, or, you could say indigenous, it's complicated a little to say it like that, but relational ways of being that recognize the personhood of other than humans. And so to be less technical about it, animism as a kind of scholarly word refers to a set of core values or a way of orienting to life that recognizes that living humans are just one kind of person, that there's a lot of other kinds of people. There's tree people, stone people, plant and mountain and animal people, and ancestor people. So not all people are human in form, and not all people are visible to living humans. But nonetheless, they are part of our extended relational kin family network, and many of them don't care about us, and a small percentage of other people, human and otherwise, have ill intent toward us, and a small percentage are actively interested and helpful toward us. And so the relational field that warrants consideration is way more complicated and vast than just other living humans. I'm saying this also as a licensed therapist, as a doctor of psychology. Western psychology is brilliant in many ways, and it's very limited in the sense that it unconsciously, for the most part, is focusing on living human relationships with themselves and other living humans. Cool, important, radically incomplete. And to just take that focus as a given in an unconscious way reflects unconscious amnesia and cultural damage from a colonialist or empire-oriented framework that delegitimized or negated the personhood or the legitimacy of these other kinds of people who are not human-shaped, often a long time ago. And so, and relegates that to some kind of indigenous, primitive, superstitious mindset, which is actually more sophisticated than a real modern limiting frame.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I love you articulating it as a function of cultural damage. I was thinking about just speaking with you about animism and the language around stone people and tree people, and it makes a lot of sense to me. And I imagine other people thinking that's really weird, or what do I want to say? Yeah, there's a sort of squeamishness about being odd, and I wonder if that fear of being weird is not its own evidence of cultural damage.
It is. I mean, the idea that the Earth moved around the sun was weird, and that there are small living beings that can't be perceived by humans, that's a weird idea historically. And yet both turn out to be quite fruitful as a way of seeing the world. And so the idea that people of color are fully human was weird 150 years ago, and still I think is weird to some racist people in the United States, for example. And so just to say the cultural norms about what is acceptable are not a good metric for what's anchored in truth. And when I say anchored in truth, I don't mean to be dogmatic about it. I don't actually care about belief per se, but I'm suggesting that if we hold a relational stance toward life and toward the other than humans, toward the beings whose bodies are what we call nature, we get better results. It's a more loving and kind way of moving in the world. And many people who could be described as indigenous from whatever our ancestors may be, my own ancestors being German, English, Irish, early settler colonizers to North America. But nonetheless, I have ancestors, older ancestors, who saw the world in a very relational way. And so the views that would be seen as weird, if you will, now by a lot of people are quite normal still in many parts of the world. And I would suggest that they're quite normal to all of our ancestors at a certain point, because if you live very closely and consciously in connection with the plants and animals upon whose lives you depend just to continue, then you know that you get better results if you relate with them respectfully and consciously, rather than just objects or resources. So being respectful and kind gets better results. Whether or not it's true, it doesn't matter. It's a better way to be.
I was watching one of the videos you posted as part of the Practical Animism class with the beautiful painted arrow singing and dancing to the squash she's growing.
Yeah.
And, I thought it was such an interesting perspective that the industrial agriculture, the way he described it is that the plants sort of withhold their nutrients. So we're getting less nutrition out of the plants because they're just trying to survive the onslaught of industrial agriculture. And there he is dancing and singing and patting the squash. I thought it was really beautiful.
Yeah. Look, if we want to think of embodiment, it behooves us to see others as being embodied as well. So it's not just so individualistic. And so from an embodied place, how do we see the chickens and the squash and even the corn in the corn syrup that we're consuming in an embodied way? And turn to face the chickens and the squash or whatever and say, thanks for your life. You're lovely. I'm now going to kill you and eat your body. And eating is a very intimate kind of action. And it's a action that requires killing, even for vegans. And it is a place that many people would turn away from rather than face the intimacy in killing. And so there's opportunity in the topic of eating to face the shame that many people feel just about living, and the self-worth issues that can be a snag for people. Like, there's a lot of folks who may not feel like they deserve to eat once they really tune in to the intelligence and the big spirits that are the plants and the animals who we eat, and that it's intimate to take life. And I don't have the view personally that we shouldn't kill. We must kill. We're heterotrophs. We eat the bodies of others. So unless we're going to be in a state of just conflict about our very existence, there's a need to work with the sacrifice we require in a different way, and to turn toward the beings who give their lives for us, and say thank you, to acknowledge them.
Yeah, the intimacy and relationship of that. We've all been in Buddhist circles, and I always struggled with the notion in a lot of Buddhist schools that it's different, less karma if you're not the one who's actually butchering the meat or taking the life, and it never made sense to me that it would actually seem much more beneficial to be the one who's praying and taking the life and having that intimacy there.
I think it's great for people who are able and constitutionally feel like they can do it to participate in the killing from time to time of the plants or the animals that they're eating to live. And even if you can't, because it's not practical for everybody, I think it's important to thank the people who are doing it. And the idea that we can distance from the karmic impacts of killing, it's a super classist, like rude view. I know it's present, especially in Vajrayana Buddhism, that, some practitioners might choose to not eat meat and think that those killing the meat incur those karmic consequences when they don't themselves. I mean, that's really, is a super problematic stance, of course. And I'd frame it instead as because we take life in order to live, I would say we have an obligation and indebtedness to make use of our precious life and to remember what we're doing here and to bring wisdom and compassion and kindness into the world and to seek to be of service in whatever way is right for our destiny and to do right by those who die so we can live by bringing a lot of love into the world. So it's not that there isn't connectedness or indebtedness, there definitely is. But as we're weird creatures, we're like empathic carnivores, and it creates all kinds of problems and requires a lot of healthy culture for humans to start well.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about ancestral healing and why that's important, especially now with so many, the world is in kind of dire straits, and why does that matter?
Yeah, well, there aren't any environmental problems. First off, there are really, to frame it more acutely, there are human behavior problems. And the human behavior problems source from a misunderstanding of who we are that suggests that we can act in ways that harm others, human and otherwise, without accountability. That you can harm others without harming yourself. And that is a really troubled and fragmented idea. And so for human behavior to shift, humans kind of need to have a different picture of who we are that's more interconnected and that comes with more inherent accountability. And one of the aspects of that, it's not the only one, is for humans to realize that we are part of lineages. We're part of a larger ancestral network, and that the ancestors dwell in the present. They're the souls or the spirits of the previously incarnate folks who are not incarnate right now, but are here nonetheless. And that a lot of another important principle is with the work with the human ancestors is that not all of those who are dead are equally well in spirit. The condition of living humans, runs the full spectrum from people are awesome to people are dangerous. And it's true with the dead as well. And so when cultures haven't been tending with the ancestors, as a lot of, let's say, European settler colonialist cultures haven't. It's not the only culture that has neglected those things, but speaking from my own position as an American white guy, I see a lot of that. And when that happens, it means that there's a big ghost problem. There's a lot of ancestors who are behind the scenes, if you will, or in a less visible way, exacerbating or fueling or driving the cultural dysfunction. So there's the white people acting poorly, and then there's all the white ghosts that are eating the white people and others alive through the incarnate white people. And so part of the source of my sort of grim job security is the amnesia that fuels the idea of whiteness, and how it's needed for, and now not to focus so much just on race, but I'll go with this for a minute, is it's needed for people, especially of settler colonialist ancestries, or people who have been, who have left their place of ancestral origins in a aggressive way, or in a way that doesn't bring etiquette to the lands where they're settling. It's needed for folks of those ancestries to face the unpaid debts and the harms that have been incurred, and to help their own ancestors, help our own ancestors to get healed up, one, and then to partner with them to actually bring about systemic structural change in more just ways. It's not that only people of those ancestries can benefit from ancestral reconnection, but I'm saying that the cultural troubles in the world are ancestrally generated. The racism, the sexism, the exploitative capitalism and colonialism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia and religious persecution, these different systemic, interpersonal, personal, like cultural troubles we're trying to metabolize, earth disconnection, all that. Those are troubles that came into form through our ancestors. And so it makes only good sense that we would call upon the older ancestors, the ones who were before those troubles, for intervention, because we're part of a bigger system. And if we approach healing in an isolated way, we're going to unconsciously recreate the problem of perceived isolation to begin with.
This is such a rich topic. I feel like we could unpack this for days. I would love you to say a little bit more about unpaid debts and helping our unwell ancestors to heal.
Yeah, there's a tendency for folks, ancestral healing or ancestry and all that has become a bit trendy, which is fine, it's good. And there's a tendency for folks to want to claim the blessings and goodness of their ancestors, but at times to distance from the harms that have been incurred by their people. And when I say that most people in different ways have some kind of unpaid ancestral debt, now it's different for people who were brought to the Americas non-consensually through the transatlantic slave trade. It's not to idealize people of color, but I am, from those ancestries. But is it true that those individuals would have as much unpaid ancestral debt as white people? Probably not. Everybody's got their own unique ancestral storylines, plural. But if we're talking about big cultural trends, then folks who have participated in historical harms have a bigger ledger of debt. And I'm not suggesting that it's useful to collapse into a place of guilt and shame and constriction, because it's not. It actually looks like more white centering. But I am saying that recognizing that our ancestors have participated in harm can be a catalyst to in the present, correct those harms, and to, in that way, also to sort of release or redeem or heal up our ancestors in part through that way, by addressing the ongoing racism and systemic injustice. It can be a catalyst for getting involved in making corrections. And if we expand the same way of thinking to our connection with the earth and the land and all the other than humans, of course, the debts are really tremendous. Because at least in North America, unless you're of Native or First Nations lineages, we're still in occupied space for, amidst hundreds of quite intact living tribal communities and nations, etc. And so how do you, I think personally that one of the trends I see is, I'm speaking again in North American context, but some of it applies in South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, other places of European settler colonialism. There's a habit for white people to have obnoxious, off-putting, arrogant whiffs of white supremacy behavior. And then beneath that, there's cultural low self-esteem and feeling like a culturally displaced loser, poser, I have no culture, I'm inherently annoying and harmful because I'm a white person kind of thing. Both of those stances are problematically white-centering. It's like I'm too big, I'm too small. So what is it like to become normal-sized? Well, one of the things that gets us there potentially is knowing your specific ancestry, being in relationship with them, doing the work to heal things up where it's needed, and from that place, participating in cultural healing in the present and being part of the fix and engaging the reality of what's happened. Be like, oh, there's a mess that's been created. My people somehow participated in that. Let me find a way from grounded, loving, pragmatic ethics to participate in things being better.
I love this image about becoming normal-sized. And it's so interesting relating it to whiteness. And, you know, right now I'm speaking from this Zen center where I'm doing just personal retreat, but I relate to it, you know, from the Buddhist perspective of even negative self-image is self-centeredness, you know?
That's right. Yeah.
I just love this becoming normal-sized. It feels like such a wonderful invitation and sort of relieving in both directions. So you know Bayo Akomolafe, friend of both of ours, and we just had him here in Salt Lake City a couple of weeks ago.
Great.
He's wonderful about questioning questions and sort of left a ripple in the community of folks here who came to be with him and listen to him talk about a certain kind of wariness about recreating, coming from the unconscious perspectives we're not aware of, and then recreating the trouble in our attempt to fix it.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm just curious about your sense of how, well, I don't know. I just want to say something about this animist perspective feels outside of the cultural norm for sure, and can be really helpful. Any reflections about just maybe we can't help but recreate the problem in some way, but doing our best as you're talking about healing, being a part of the cultural healing in the present.
Yeah, I don't know that, I'd say there are better and worse ways to come at it. I tend to think that I find a lot of inspiration from the teachings and language around decolonization. And to use that word, it's important to say that it's not only about thinking differently and moving differently in the world. It's also about tangible returning of land and resources and overhauling of systems of oppression. So a lot of the cultural change that needs to happen, it's very important that it happen with the actual systems and not just how you think and feel and post on Facebook. But, you know, that said, is it so easy to come at cultural healing work and unconsciously replicate the mindset that caused the trouble in the first place? Yeah, absolutely. And so what are some generalized antidotes to that? One is really placing the emphasis on relationship and getting good at listening to others, getting really curious about our impact on others, even if it is very different than what our intent may be, and is trying as much as we can to be able to assume different perspectives. There's a sort of technical way of talking about a facet of animist values, which is, I think people use the word perspectivism, but it's the ability to accurately, as much as we can, see the world through other eyes. And in a spiritual jargon, people can think of it as shape-shifting. And so some people might shape-shift into the form of a bear, but can you shape-shift into the perspective of a lower income person of color if you're a more privileged white student of shamanism? Can you shapeshift into the perspective of a 17-year-old queer person who is really wondering, if they're going to be able to ever have a social life and wants to kill themselves? Like if you are good at shapeshifting into the bodies of animals, I would hope that you could do it with other humans. And so this ability to at least attempt empathically to understand different perspectives is part of what we're being called to do. And I think it can be an antidote to dogmatic thinking and rigid views. If I have to say what's the affirmative thing, if we're trying to decolonize, so what are we trying to affirm in addition to just relationality? It's a celebration of a legitimately diverse ecosystem of different perspectives. And there might be common threads of love, wisdom, kindness, and all that. But even, let's talk about enlightenment for a sec. So you're sitting in a tradition with Zen practice that sometimes uses that language to talk about the cultivation of human potential. And so enlightenment has many different faces and is not just look like one sort of caricature of the enlightened, peaceful person. And the traditions that tend to look to the rest of the natural world as the kind of revelation or the scripture or what's holy or what's beautiful, see that in so-called nature, there's tremendous diversity of form. And so it just makes sense that in human culture, there would be tremendous diversity of form, and that mountain and otter and mugwort style enlightenment feel different to one another, but one's not above or below the other. So an indicator that we're moving generally in the right direction is that we can have enough space in our heart to savor and appreciate the sacredness of genuinely different forms. And we're not expecting the world to conform to our specific idea of what we think enlightenment or good culture, whatever looks like. That we can have core values, but still allow for a lot of flexibility within that. And that takes humility and practice and cultivation of ability to listen over time.
Mm. Daniel, I'm thinking, if someone is listening to this conversation and, have never considered that they could have a living relationship with ancestors or with tree people or stone people, what would be some first steps someone could take to entering into those relationships?
Yeah, the first thing is to intentionally try on the view that it's possible. It sounds kind of basic, but you want to, it's like you don't know if guests are coming, but you're going to set out some chairs anyways. You're like, okay, I hear that millions of other people do it. There is legitimate evidence to suggest that people think this is possible. And therefore, I'm going to try on the view that it may be possible. So hold that stance, creates a little breathing room for actual contact to occur. A second thing that I encourage people to do is to begin to speak aloud to the other than humans that are already around us, not only to our pets, but to the companion plants in our home, to the earth where we live, to the metals and the wood and the structures that make our dwellings, or the cotton and the fibers and the cloth we're wearing, that we are surrounded by the bodies of others, and that are, to use it like a sort of Buddhist pedagogical tool, sometimes people say, well, if you relate with your teacher like a cool person, you'll get a relationship with a cool person. You relate with them like a skilled teacher, you'll get a skilled teacher. You see them as a manifestation of Buddha nature, then you get to have that level of benefit, right? And so, assuming the teacher's, ethical and worth that level of trust, the same is true in a way for the so-called material world around us. If we see it as just stuff, we have a not very emotionally satisfying relationship with stuff. If we see it as potentially responsive set of maybe relationships, maybe things, kind of like looser categories, maybe we name our car, or maybe we have a kind of relationship with so-called objects or plants. And if we see what's around us as a dynamic, potentially responsive relational field of all different kinds of beings, and that we know that there are so-called spirits, or there's many kinds of people that we can't even physically see, and that we're pickled in relationship. Like there are no objects in the universe. There are only potential family members and kin. Then we get that level of potential intimacy from it. So it doesn't matter what's true. It matters what kinds of stances get better results. And if we hold a relational stance, we end up with more intimacy. We end up relating with the rest of life in a more accountable way. And we're slower to do things like strip mines and, environmentally hazardous behaviors that we're engaged in, because we know it's unethical and it hurts us on a heart body level. So, yeah.
I love being pickled in a relationship.
Yeah, good. It comes with sorrow, because we're creating such a tremendous amount of harm. So there's grief as it's one of the emotional disincentives to get reconnected. Because people, it's like, you've done harm to somebody and you sort of just want it to go away, but that the thing to do is to call them and be like, hey, sorry. It's a bit like that on a larger scale with coming back into relationship with other than humans.
I'm a huge fan of poetry, and this month I'm teaching a class on just Mary Oliver's lesser known works. And we started the whole thing with some of her pieces that are very much in the spirit of what you're describing about greeting the sun and talking to the trees and speaking to life. And it's amazing. I was talking with my women embodied group that I teach last night about this kind of intimacy with life and the sense of being woven back into the whole. And it seems almost impossible for loneliness to be there when we're living in this way. And even what you're describing, the cotton fibers in your clothing, I haven't explored that one yet, but I love that. It's just beautiful. And I really appreciate what you're saying about looking at results, not as much verifying whether it's true or not.
Yeah. Another way to think about if we talk about coming back into relationship, another way to think about what we might call the environmental crisis, or the meltdown of ecological and biological diversity on Earth because of human-driven habitat destruction and climate change. We can frame all that as a big ongoing consent violation that we're participant in. Another way, I don't know if it's a constructive way to say it or not exactly, but the other than humans could, in a sense, if they have access to social media, be like, me too, me too, me too. And the sense is just that we are culturally, and not everyone to the same degree, we're not all implicated to the same degree. Those who are in positions of relative power, who are making really harmful, greedy decisions, bear the weight of those decisions. But the sense is that there's not an etiquette of slowing down and asking, is it okay to cut into the earth here? Is it okay to farm here and to clear this forest? Is it okay to build this home here, or to reroute this stream, or to, cut these trees? And if we're not asking, because sometimes the answer may be yes, you make offerings, you do this, do that, and pause for a moment and say, please. But the answer may be yes at times. But if we're not asking, it's a consent violation, and it harms most directly the one who is being taken, and it also harms the one taking. And that soul level damage is something that we are born into, and it functions, it shows up as a source of ungrieved grief. And so once the heart comes more online, there's a sense of, oh my God, what are we doing? Why are we living like this? This is so painful and so wrong. Why are we doing this? And then maybe you cry your face off for an hour or two, and then you're hungry because we're creatures. And then you go have some food, and you don't know how that rice was cultivated, or where the sesame seeds and the gamasio came from, or where the tea came from and how it was cultivated. And so we're embedded in a system that sustains itself through consent violations and through an objectification of the other than humans that enables those violations. I don't mean it to be heavy-handed or to encourage despair, but I'm saying the price of coming back into relationship is to be able to face some of that bit by bit and to be like, wow, I'm sorry for how we live. It's really not okay. I'm trying to do better.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the term Francis Weller uses about how our culture is so rooted in anesthesia and amnesia, and this way that it really to take in that embeddedness and the harm that's going on continuously feels like it's a real stretch of taking in both the joys and sorrows of that.
Yeah, it's true. And we can't have the sweet, blissful, open-hearted reconnection without also signing up to feel a bit of the harm that's happening. And to know that if we circle back to embodiment in the big sense, in the sort of cosmic sense, if you will, which is not just a pretty teaching, it's accurate, it's objective. This body, these individual bodies are as big as the earth, as big as the universe. And that's weird, of course, but it is also accurate. And so it means that the harms happening to the other than humans, the harms happening to our human brothers and sisters and queer folks and people of all different bodies and expressions, the harms happening to them are also happening personally, directly to us. It's very personal.
Yeah.
Racism hurts white people. Transphobia hurts cisgendered people. Poverty hurts those with money. Like it needs to become that personal.
One of the things that Carl and I do is host community grief tending rituals here. And
good, thanks.
Yeah, it's important and so needed. And I'm curious, I know Ifa is one of your lineages that you carry, and if from that or your lineages, how do you work with this grief? Because it's huge.
It is. Of all the things I've learned and continue to learn from involvement in Yoruba traditions and culture, I haven't necessarily learned a lot about grieving per se. I know that Malidoma, as a Dagara teacher, has popularized, along with the late Sabanfu Sameh, a lot of teachings on grief from at least Dagara West African perspective. And it's not that it's not present in Yoruba culture, but it hasn't been a source of influence around that topic for me, per se. Of course, Martine Prechtel is a popular teacher, and as is the psychotherapy. And so I've learned a lot from my training in psychology and from the just willingness to be cracked open. And what did I say? I've also seen it modeled well in participation in Native North American ways and sweat lodges in particular, and in the Inipi ceremony and Lakota tradition, and in Native American church, seeing adults, men also, just weep openly for how we are with the earth and with one another, and having that modeled for me, to say, oh, as part of being a grown-up, to be able to weep openly for how we are and to feel the impact of things. Well, that's been very helpful to me to see that modeled. And I would say in Yoruba tradition, one of the things that is more clearly in the teachings that I've encountered so far is one of accountability, that if you make some kind of harm, you need to fix it. You need to accept that there's a repair needed if you incur consequence with another person. And that accountability to one another, it doesn't prevent loss from happening, but it can minimize the degree to which communal harms get out of hand. If things get addressed earlier, and there's an ethic of we must work it out with one another, then that accountability to one another can minimize unnecessary suffering at times. Yeah.
So sort of a subject jump, but feels connected. I follow you on social media and love to see the photographs of these gorgeous organic, I don't know if you call them shrines, that look like they're made of flowers and plants and seeds and all kinds of things, as part of your ancestral healing work. What are those, and how does beauty play into this? Since we've got heavy with grief and the light.
No, for sure. Maybe 10 years or more ago, a friend and colleague, Meg Beeler in the Bay Area, just to give a day-long teaching, sharing the basic form of the despacho, which is practiced by different Quechua-speaking people in the Andes. I think she learned it in Peru from teachers there, and it's a widely practiced form. The despachar is to send in Spanish, or to dispatch, or to send off, and it is a practice of making offerings, and it can be for many different intentions. And so, to feed the ancestors can be one intention. And so that's the form that I've most often used. That it's the intention I've most often used that ritual form for. And in the 3-day intensives that I guide, and now others who have trained guide, the habit is to craft one of these offerings, and it's a base upon which prayers are then made with the kintus, with leaves, and then the whole thing is bundled up and often burned, but occasionally buried or other things, and delivered, despachado, to the spirits. And the sense is that so there's a nod of inspiration to the Andean despacho ceremony. In some ways, I've articulated it to such an embellished level. I'm not suggesting it's better, it's just embellished, that it is a bit different from how it's held traditionally. So, but the form itself is shared generously and widely by those peoples. And so we've embellished it a bit. And the intent is really just to feed with beauty, with offerings, with prayers, our relationship with the others. And this emphasis on feeding is present in so many different traditions that foreground the importance of relationships. That feeding can happen through physical offering. It can happen through beautifully spoken words, movement, solitude, actions of service, just quality time, whatever it might be. It's not so different from how we attempt to feed relationships with other living humans. But getting good at feeding our connection with the spirits and with the other than humans is part of the relearning. Once we're like, great, we can connect with the trees, then it becomes like, well, what supports that? What are trees like? Which trees? For what, so then we need to narrow in on how we actually take care of the relationships. So being beautiful and authentic and getting your hands in the offerings, that's one way to go about it. And they're pretty. People like it. And they're fun to burn. And it's a good reminder, as, of course, the Tibetans know that when you make something really lovely, it's good to really relish the impermanence of it.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. Trying to decide which question to ask. We have a few that are bubbling up. I guess maybe I'll start with this one. And if you don't feel like talking about it, you can, say that and I'll ask you the next question. I'm fascinated about what do your days look like living in this way?
Just what's my life like? How do I?
Yeah, are you making offerings and what's it look like this?
Kind of. I tend to the shrines that I've been entrusted with as an initiative in Ifa, Obatala, Oshun, Egungun, and Oshugbo priesthoods in Yoruba tradition, and the lineage of Oduwofalu Adesanya Woyade from Oderemo is my Oluwo and teacher. So I happen to be a practitioner of those ways, so I tend with those shrines, which includes making offerings. I'm a practical person. I still, if my wife doesn't check me on it, will eat fast food. I'm a parent, so I'm hanging out and trying to be a good dad. And I'm, I like watching Netflix, and I'm like a really kind of regular person. And I think that is important to not make some weird, awkward spiritual identity. So I actually have a disdain for people who hold the view that truncating your emotional life or not being, that you have to be all transcendent or weird about being connected or something. I don't see it like that. And I spend a lot of time on the computer doing admin work because I'm trying to build an organization, a network of ritualists, and attending with community is a giant pain in the butt in a really sacred and holy way, because people's stuff gets slid up, and humans, myself included, need a lot of relational care. And yet, if we don't have some kind of structure of working together or networking, community, whatever that looks like, then I think the impact of what we're trying to do sometimes isn't as strong. And so it just requires a lot of time on the phone, time with emails and all that. And I travel and teach, and so I'm planning for teaching in Europe and doing online teaching, and a lot of things I'm trying to do in balance with being a good husband and dad and grounded, healthy, spiritual dude that people actually place some trust in. Yeah. But I don't spend an hour a day in spiritual practice. I think I should on some level, but I don't. So, oh well, it waxes and wanes. So.
I so appreciate the answer. And, I would say Carl and I have that disdain for that holy, transcendent posturing. I kind of can't stand that. So I love you naming it and your realness. The other question I wanted to ask was about, I know there's scientific research about looking at ancestral trauma in people's DNA, right? Holocaust victims and descendants of those and other situations like that. Is there research about ancestral healing, or do you imagine there will be?
I don't know that there is much of it. It would be nice if there were. The research to date would be to shift out of a more empiricist, scientism, reductionistic Western model that racistly delegitimizes indigenous epistemologies, and recognize that there's actually a tremendous amount of field work that has been done by indigenous peoples around the world, and that their emotional, physical, spiritual labor that continues to recognize the importance of tending with the ancestors is a kind of research that dwarfs whatever would be done by modern Western scientific methods, which are legitimate in their own way. So in that sense, I would say that there's a tremendous amount of research in the most qualitatively good relational way that research on such things can be done.
Thank you so much for framing it that way. It's important.
Yeah. And it would be cool if more people did their dissertation on it and all that. But I wrote a dissertation. People don't read them. It's a really stale process. If anyone has ever written one, I'm sorry. Like, it's discouraging. And not always, but the work needs to reach people on a wider scale. We're in tremendous crisis, and so there's not too much time to spend with things that don't have a practical application.
Yeah, one of the things I love, Daniel, in your teaching is just how much you emphasize that these are things that we all can learn, that growing up in, say, white North America, where it wasn't emphasized, every color, gender has access to this way of being.
It's true. I'm really interested in what you call animist, or maybe ancestral pedagogy, but it's really animism in a bigger sense. That framework holds the ancestral reconnection. And as a teacher, I'm how to say, I mean, my dad and my brother are both engineers. I'm about almost half German ancestrally, and I'm very practical and systematic and skills oriented. And I think that when you're teaching, the emphasis should be on the students. I know it's a radical idea, but some teachers work with a lot of charisma, and I'd like to think whatever charisma I have is sort of incidental or accidental, and I've actually been complimented on my lack of charisma, which takes me a minute to really take that one in. And no, it's learnable. It's totally learnable. How to, just like we learn how, or fail to learn how to actually do human relationships, like knowing in a group how to shut your mouth when you've already said a lot, and not, or how to not just talk over people, or how to, those are learnable skills. And our lives go better, and there's more intimacy in our lives if we can learn them. And learning how to cultivate a relationship with the land and the spirits where you live, it's learnable. It really is. So even for the most, it's kind of a weirdly racist view to suggest that knowing how to connect with the rest of life is dependent on what kind of body you're born into. It comes from an idealization of indigenous people, or perhaps even idealization of people of color, as somehow more spiritual. And it's a problematic way to see it. And to idealize people is also to objectify them. And so it's the most, like the people born into the small handful of tribes on earth in remote places that haven't even been contacted by outsiders, those children being born this week into those communities, they still learn how to do this stuff from their parents and elders and family and those around them. It's learnable. It's how it's how we are. We're creatures.
Mm-hmm. So along that line too, do you have a vision for your work, or like what?
Yeah, I was saying to somebody the other day, I still just get like 2 steps. The spirits just show me like 2 breadcrumbs ahead. A vision. I want to have a long life and unfold whatever needs unfolded. I would like to see animist values be mainstream and part of the legal, political discourse, And I would like to see other than human people have legal standing. I would like to effectively train and have others who can then train really down to earth, essentially priesthood or spirit workers who are good at not just ancestral healing, but work with the land and spirits of place in a way that's culturally healing and recognizes the legacies we're up against, and to reintroduce core ritual skills into the mainstream in a way that is not dogmatic and just very accessible to people and psychologically grounded and sensible. That's enough to keep me busy. I'd like to write a few more books, and yeah, that'll probably be enough.
Good thing to be kept busy.
Beautiful vision.
Trying.
So you're teaching this course on practical animism, and I love the emphasis on practical. It really comes across.
It allows me to weave in a lot of highly theoretical documents, which are in the course. So I'm actually, it's a balancer for me to name it that. But yeah, go ahead.
Great. And I know you do ancestral healing work, workshops around the world. As you're saying, you're heading to Europe soon.
That's true.
And then you're also training people in ancestral healing. Do you want to say anything more about ways people can work with you?
Yeah, sure. There are a handful of ways. I mean, an easy one is to get the book, because there's a lot of material in there. It's called Ancestral Medicine. And another is the online courses. The Animism course stays open until the middle of June 2019, and then the registration's open, I believe, for the Ancestral Healing course that runs again in the fall. And those are really thorough. There's a lot of material in them, and they're well held, and there's a lot of supporters in the course, and so people tend to feel pretty well met by those. And the session work for the ancestral healing is run by people I've trained, and there's about 40, 50 people guiding that now, of diverse ancestries and language proficiencies and gender identities and geographies. And so chances are, if folks want to work with someone of a certain background, they could feel well met by that, and that doesn't need to happen in person at all. So wherever you're at, it's okay. And I guide in-person intensives, yeah, and folks I've trained do that as well throughout North America. And I'll be teaching this summer in Portugal and Germany and Finland, Austria and England. And finally, starting next March, but the applications and interviews are happening now, we'll be training a fourth group of people to guide the ancestral healing work. And so if anyone's listening, you're drawn to the work, you're a dedicated ritualist or have a healing arts practice already, then it's something worth considering to reach out about that. So that's exciting to me and to our teaching staff to be helping others to step into that vocation, really, or to acquire that skill set. So at least all those things, which is plenty to keep me busy.
It's rich. It's so rich. I know we could probably sit here and talk for hours, but we said we would keep it to an hour. So I just want to thank you for your work in the world. I know both of us really personally appreciate it, and we're grateful to be able to share a glimpse and connection with our listeners.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. Thank you, Carl. And I just hope folks who are listening feel encouraged about your own capacity to relate well and kindly and effectively with the other than humans, with your own ancestors, and that if you're drawn to the kinds of things that we're talking about, to feel heartened that there's support and that these things are learnable. And it's not too late to reclaim these capacities if they're not already online for you. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.